Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, pressure on Hamas from all sides as the U.S. undertakes its own talks independent of Israel. Plus, a look at where the money went, how USAID billions have gone into the hands of terrorists. We'll hear from Reserve Brigadier General Danny Van Buren on how the new IDF Chief of Staff may bring changes to how the war is fought. And brave families willing to return back to their homes in the north. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. In a very recent security development, 10 Indian construction workers were rescued from captivity in the Arab village of Al-Zaim, north of Jerusalem. They had been lured there by Palestinians with the promise of construction work, only to have their passports seized and to find themselves being held hostage for more than a month. The stolen passports were used by their captors for illegal entry into Israel. The overnight rescue operation was done by the IDF in cooperation with the Justice Ministry. Turning to the war in Gaza, the White House has confirmed it's holding direct negotiations with Hamas in an effort to secure the release of American hostages, while Israel is signaling growing frustration over the U.S. approach. Our war correspondent Chuck Holton has that story and more.
The White House confirmed Wednesday that it is engaged in secret direct negotiations with Hamas over the release of American hostages held in Gaza. Officials defended the talks as part of a broader effort to protect Americans.
And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people.
After 33 hostages were released in recent weeks, 59 still remain captive in Gaza. President Trump met with recently released hostages in the Oval Office yesterday, who thanked him for his efforts.
I was starved and I was tortured. You are the reason I am home alive.
In a social media post, President Trump called Hamas sick and twisted, calling on them to release the hostages or there will be hell to pay.
People don't realize the president meets with these people, he hears their stories, he's outraged and rightfully so, he's tired and he's lost his patience with it.
Hamas responded it will only free the remaining hostages when there's a permanent ceasefire. In Israel, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi officially stepped down as the IDF Chief of Staff. In his farewell speech, he reflected on the challenges faced during his tenure.
This is my shift, and what happened is my responsibility. I would have preferred, of course, that none of this had happened.
Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir is taking over, promising to bring victory to Israel and ensure the nation's security.
We will not forgive or forget. We will pursue our enemies and overtake them.
Meanwhile, in a strong message to the United Nations, a Syrian activist called out regional governments that support terrorism while condemning Israel.
And I want to testify before God and you, Israel is not the problem. I ask Qatar, why did you finance terror? Iran, why do you send billions to Hamas and Hezbollah instead of liberating your own people who are suffering oppression and poverty? Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, be a better Arab, be a better Muslim.
The U.S. is redesignating the Iran-backed Houthi rebels as a foreign terrorist organization. They face new U.S. sanctions aimed at cutting off funding and weapons. Officials say negotiations center on the safe return of 24 hostages still believed to be alive, particularly Israeli-American Aidan Alexander, along with the bodies of at least 35 others.
We feel that Hamas has not been forthright with us, and it's time for them to be forthright with us. The president has issued a statement about what's acceptable to him and what's not.
While the U.S. pursues diplomatic talks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly unhappy about the effort. Sources close to his office say he fears it could undercut Israel's war effort and pressure to force Hamas surrender.
They have 59 hostages, of which many of them are killed. And those 24 that are living, they said they're in very bad shape.
Meanwhile, Hamas has issued a threat, saying it'll execute hostages if Israel resumes its military offensive in Gaza. But the Trump administration is adamant, and some form of joint U.S. military involvement with Israel may not be off the table.
I think it's fairly clear he was saying, I've had enough. I wouldn't test President Trump.
Witkoff says the brutality hostages endured has only strengthened Trump's resolve.
There's a lot of conversation among these hostages about the deprivation that they went through, about murders that they saw. And I think that the president listened to it, absorbed it, and said, it's unacceptable. I'm not going to tolerate this type of behavior.
The administration has not disclosed what action it may take next, but Trump is determined the U.S. will not back down.
We want to see these hostages come home. We're not going to sit here, do nothing, and tolerate these inhumane conditions. They've lived in a terrible situation. By the way, who keeps dead bodies? Who does that? Who keeps people chained up downstairs? Who murders in front of other hostages? What's happened here is intolerable.
The administration says Hamas cannot remain in power in Gaza. With time running out and no breakthrough yet, the next move belongs to Hamas, and the world is watching. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Jerusalem.
A group of evangelical leaders came to Israel recently to show support for Benjamin Netanyahu and the idea that Israel would declare sovereignty over biblical Judea and Samaria. They met with the Prime Minister, and our Middle East correspondent Paul Strand spoke with Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council about that meeting.
So, Tony, what went on with your meeting with the Prime Minister?
Well, Paul, we had, I think, a very good meeting as the president kind of the Prime Minister laid out his priorities of what Israel is dealing with right now. Number one is getting the hostages back. I mean, he's been making that very clear. One is there was a clear understanding that Hamas has to be eliminated, that is not part of the future. There was also a discussion about what's been referred to as the head of the snake, Iran, that it continues to be a threat and that it continues to, even now, actively, it's involved in the region. So while it has been degraded to some degree, to a large degree, it is still a threat to Israel and the Middle East.
Was there any sense that if Iran is taken care of, if their nuclear threat is removed and they're no longer a big power, that maybe that'd take care of the Shiite problem, but that's a Sunni problem maybe on the rise right now? Did that come up at all?
No, I think the Prime Minister, and not all this came up in the conversation, there were other leaders that I met with this week and had conversations, there is great hope with the return of President Donald Trump that there will be a continued normalization of relationships, an expansion of that, possibly with Saudi Arabia and others in the region. So there's hope that there can be a managed peace in this area of the world. But it's going to require that Hamas is not able to continue to launch attacks or in any way threaten the security of Israel and the Jewish people.
Does the Prime Minister see the problem that from Hamas's viewpoint, it's like, well, we're the ones with the hostages, we're the ones with the power, we'll decide whether we're going to go or not, and we're not going to go. Is there that sense that this is like an intractable problem, that Israel says they have to go, and they're saying, we're not going to go?
Well, I think there's a clear understanding, again, that there's a priority in getting the hostages out. The Prime Minister made that very clear. But there's also a recognition that Hamas has to go. Now, some would say those are two mutually exclusive priorities. Mm-hmm. Israel does not see it that way.
Really? So they see a path where they could get the hostages and Hamas would still agree to go. That's interesting.
Well, they may agree one way or the other.
Okay. Anything else pop up there, like Syria or Turkey? Any other threats?
Well, our meeting was relatively short with the Prime Minister as he had spent the day in court. You know, one thing that part of my conversations with other leaders here is that Israel has its own deep state. The United States is not the only one. President Trump is not the only one to face a deep state. So does Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
That needs to be solved. Well, thank you so much. Tony Perkins, Family Research Council.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
Coming up, where did the money go? Indications that the U.S. taxpayer has been funding Hamas directly. The Trump administration's examination into America's major foreign aid organization made headlines for exposing billions in questionable spending. One key discovery is that it sent funds to the Hamas terror group even after October 7th. As a government agency, the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, uses taxpayer dollars for civilian foreign aid and development assistance. Recent revelations, however, indicate it's been funding America's enemies and those pledged to destroy Israel.
Dozens of terror organizations have received indirect assistance from U.S. foreign aid.
During this congressional hearing on how USAID used its money, Greg Roman, executive director of the Middle East Forum, used Gaza as a case study.
$2.1 billion in American taxpayers' money to Gaza since October 7th when Hamas invaded southern Israel. USAID money was going in terms of an emergency use authorization to try to go to parties that USAID formerly had a relationship with in the Gaza Strip. They had to have been vetted by OFAC. They should have been vetted against the special designated terror list from the State Department and from other Treasury organizations.
The investigation, however, tells a different story.
Waivers were granted because they said that there was an emergency use to have that money come in to Gaza, thereby jettisoning the usual typical screening procedures. As a result, 90% of aid that was going from the United States by way of its agents in Gaza ended up in Hamas-controlled areas. And this is ridiculous. Essentially, what the U.S. assistance to Gaza did was underwrite the ability for Hamas to survive until the ceasefire was just passed.
CBN News reached out to USAID for a response on the continuation of the funds after October 7th, but did not receive a reply. In his role with DOGE, Elon Musk began to make cuts to the agency almost immediately, although the terror funding has been cited before. Senator Ted Cruz told ABC News that he brought up the funding of Hamas long before Trump's reelection.
The previous administration, I held up the confirmation of the Middle East director for USAID because USAID was sending millions of dollars into Gaza that was going directly to Hamas and being used to fund terrorism, and they were hiding it. They were trying to keep it in darkness.
Avi Abelo of the Pulse of Israel tells CBN News not only did USAID fund Hamas before October 7th, it kept flowing afterwards.
USAID continued to give money to Hamas after the October 7th massacre, mass raping, mutilation, kidnapping of Israelis. And not only that, they also continue to give money to the Palestinian Authority.
Abelo sees no difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
They have the same goal to destroy Israel, just different strategies. Because the Palestinian Authority uses its money not just to pay its own terrorists. They use $97 million to pay Hamas terrorists who did the horrific massacre of October 7th.
He adds that means American taxpayer dollars have unknowingly supported a terrorist regime.
This has tremendous implications of understanding that one, USAID was used in a horrific fashion, where American taxpayer money is literally funding terror. And Israelis and Americans have to understand they were not a friend of Israel. They pretended to be a friend of Israel, but they were literally working against us with their money.
According to reports, USAID gave $310 million to Sanad Construction Resources Company for a Palestinian cement factory project in 2016. And while some was likely used for homes and other infrastructure, Abelo and others believe it could also have been used to fortify Hamas operations.
Now, anyone who knows the situation in Gaza, Hamas built around 500 kilometers of terror tunnels under the ground that were used to attack us, that were used for them to be able to run into the ground and escape our soldiers were running in, used to hide our hostages and scutter them away in different places so that our soldiers wouldn't be able to find them. What do you think that cement factory was used for?
Abelo believes that every U.S. administration wanted to keep its allies under its control.
They wanted Israel to be small. They wanted to institute a two-state solution that, in a sense, endangers Israel. And that was the ultimate policy behind the USAID aid. They want Hamas to be in power. They want the Palestinians to be in power. They want Israel to be in danger and then always reliant on Big Brother America to come save it, but only if we listen to them.
He says it's a good thing that President Trump is now changing that approach.
We need Israel to be strong. It's in American foreign policy's interest interest that Israel be strong. It's not good for America that these terrorists are in Gaza, that these Islamo-Nazis are in Judea and Samaria. He understands not only for Israel, but for the benefit of America, we have to finally end this.
Still ahead, Hamas struts the stage in Gaza, seemingly humiliating Israel. Is there any truth to their narrative?
To many in Israel, the ceasefire seems like it left the country in a type of limbo. Not all the hostages are returned, and Hamas appears to still be in power in Gaza. I asked Reserve Brigadier General Danny Van Buren about this and other aspects of Israel's war with hostile neighbors. Take a look. Reserve Brigadier General Danny Van Buren, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Now, Israel is in this kind of awkward pause right now with the war, but Hamas is claiming victory. Did Hamas win and Hezbollah win, or did Israel win?
Well, first of all, they definitely lost. Because if you only judge it by military terms, then Hezbollah was brought to its knees. It completely lost all of its manpower, all of its infrastructures, all of its weapons.
Right.
And if you judge it in, if you look at the southern area and you look at Gaza, then Hamas was almost completely eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it counts now the numbers of casualties by the thousands. It lost all of its tunnels that it used millions of foreign aid to build during 20 years, and most of them are destroyed. So the only way you would say that Hamas could win is just telling a lie or a narrative which is definitely not correct. But I have to admit that we still have to finish the war because there are different angles in winning a war against a regular army or against a terror organization.
Like, for example?
Yeah, we used to think in the West that by killing such a so-and-so activists and by taking out most of the weapons of the terror organization, they're going to lose. Not. They are based by or activating according to jihadic ideology. And in order for this kind of organization to be able to exercise its ideology, they need two factors. One of them is land, and the other is the ability to be in control over the population. And these two elements are still over there. Part of the reason is the fact that the former administration forced Israel to supply the Hamas organization with food, fuel, and even cigarettes, and they kept their ability to stay in power. And the other, that the IDF so far refrained from taking and conquering the land. So in these two respects, we still need to finish the job.
Okay, now a big wound still for Israel is the whole issue of the hostages. How can Israel get these hostages back?
Yeah, so far it's a huge issue because in Israel we cherish life, and Hamas ideology, they glorify death. We can see it over the past dozens of years. And the effects is that so far we played by their own, ideology or way of thinking, because we kept on letting them, release each time 2 or 3 hostages, doing all these walks of shame, and it was a big show and so on, in order to show that they are still in power. I think we need to change the way of thinking, and in order for us to release the rest of the hostage, which is a sacred mission for us in Israel, we need to start exercising our full military power and leave Hamas with the only alternative. It's either you die and we get the hostages by military force, or we are letting you, get your people out of Gaza and you will release the hostages, because otherwise we will be forced to see again all these shows, and the Israeli society will not be able to bear this kind of consequences.
Yeah. Now, you were the former commander, the friend of the new chief of staff, Israel's new chief of staff. How do you think things might look differently going forward at this point?
I think dramatically, because if we are looking back at 50 years of generals, chief of staffs, they are all coming from the same way of thinking. Part of the reason is out of 14 former chief of staffs, 11 are coming from either special units or from the parachutes. And you know, this creates kind of mentality that they're all thinking the same way. The new chief of staff I know him as a great commander and used to be a friend, is coming from the tanks. And he's seeing things differently in the way his military way of thinking. And I think he's bringing new spirits. He already implied that he's going to make some dramatic changes in the general staff. And I think he's going to exercise the IDF's full strength. Mm-hmm. And this will help us finish the two missions that I mentioned before, is taking the land and taking Hamas out of power.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Danny Van Buren, for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
When we come back, returning to their homes in the north after being evacuated for more than a year. It's easier said than done.
Thousands of Israelis who fled their homes along the northern border during months of rocket attacks are now being allowed to return. The government has reopened the area, and while some families are eager to rebuild, others are hesitant. CBN's Chuck Holton traveled to the region to see how the recovery is unfolding.
The last time our CBN news crew visited Kiryat Shimona in Israel's north, it was a virtual ghost town. And rocket attacks from Hezbollah were an everyday reality. Fine line between brave and stupid. Here we go again. Here we go again. Get down, get down. Now, with 2 months of relative peace, more than 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes are able to return. Life, though, is far from normal as businesses struggle to reopen with only a fraction of residents back home.
We had to evacuate from Bet Hillel. We couldn't stay here. The army asked us to leave Bet Hillel because they're afraid from the bombs.
Hope is budding along with spring, although there are still concerns things may never be the same.
In the first week, I couldn't stop crying all the time. Until the hostages come home, our joy will not complete.
This farm outside Kiryat Shimona, just a few miles from the Lebanese border, is known for these beautiful oranges and the pecans that they grow here. But right now, they're having a hard time finding anybody to come and help them harvest these things. These trees are full of fruit right now. But the foreign-born workers that usually come from Thailand and elsewhere to help them, many of those guys have already moved on to other jobs. And so they are hoping that they can get people to come back and help them get their fruit to market. Now the family's working to rebuild and welcome guests again.
We cleaned everything and start to plant everything, renew everything, and now people start to come back.
For those who have returned, hope remains their region can be rebuilt and return to normal.
To see people come here is amazing. To come back, to see everything come to life again, it's amazing. Sometimes I just stare and speechless of what's happening here.
I'm at the extreme northern border of Israel, just north of the town of Metula, which has been a ghost town for the last 15 months. But now people are starting to come back because if you see that fence right there, that's the border. Just the other side of that is a village inside Lebanon where Hezbollah was firing rockets on a daily basis in here. But that village is nothing but rubble now. And for that reason, the people feel safer coming back home.
While the war, we were open. Meanwhile, all the Kiryat Shimona was evacuated. We basically was the one business that working. We give serve to the police, the military, the soldiers.
This shawarma shop in the center of town was the only restaurant to stay open for the entire war.
Maybe 30% of Kiryat Shimona community has come back because the evacuation has been longer. So some people has stayed in the hotels, and I hope everyone will come back soon.
Even those who have realized the war is not over.
I cannot tell you the feeling. Now I'm talking with you and I'm starting to cry because I think about all the people that they cannot come back. and about the families and the babies that murdered there. And I love Israel very, very much. I don't want to leave Israel.
From Northern Israel, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Please keep praying for the hostages still being held in Gaza. And pray also for the peace of Jerusalem, that no weapon formed against Israel would prosper. And remember, the God who watches over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.